Good morning, Professor McCorriston.
Good morning, Dr. McClymans.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for making time for this interview and conversation that we'll have for the next hour or so. And hello to our Facebook friends who hopefully are here live with us. Still learning these tools, so I can't, oh yeah, I can see there's 3 people. So hello, welcome. And I'll just briefly introduce our guest today. This is Professor Joy McCorriston. She's a professor of anthropology at Ohio State University, of course. And she has degrees from Yale, Sorbonne, from the University of London. Her PhD is from Yale. And so Ohio State's very lucky to have such a prestigious scholar, as you will learn. And we were just going over her CV, we were having a private conversation before this, and I had counted up about 3 million in grants that she's gotten over her career. So very, very impressive scholar. She's done extensive field work, so she has immense international experience, and deep, embedded experience in the Middle East. She's done, we're going to talk a lot about her fieldwork in Yemen today, but she's also done fieldwork in Syria and Oman. And of course, spending time in France and in the UK for her studies. And I'm sure many more places that I'm not aware of. Her husband is also an anthropologist, and I'm sure her son is growing up with just amazing cross-cultural experiences as well. So yeah, it's definitely been an honor for me to know Dr. McCorriston, and she's always been a supportive force for myself and for the director of our center, Dr. Alam Payand, an ally and a friend in terms of, really bringing out Middle East studies at Ohio State. And I think one of the things that pops out at me when looking at her career and just knowing her is her leadership. She directs teams. She's a great team builder. And I am on a team with her right now, which hopefully we'll get to that project if we have enough time. And she's just amazing. And we're so lucky to have her leadership at OSU. And she has sparked and forged all this teamwork to create new knowledge about our understanding of not only the Middle East, but actually of, humankind, because we're talking about anthropology and how the different lifestyles and ways of making a living that people have done for thousands of years. So let's dig into it. Why don't you tell us about you just recently published a book, and I'm going to share my screen so I can show the cover to people. But why don't you tell us about your book and how do you feel about that? Does it feel good to have that published?
Oh, it feels immensely good to have it published. And the book is available online through open access, at least through May, through the Kotzen Institute of Archaeology at University of California, Los Angeles. That is a concession to the pandemic and the restriction on physical circulation that we are all facing. So the book is called The Landscape History of Hadramaut. I started writing it in 2013, went on sabbatical and continued chipping away at it. It has the contributions of the research team that I worked with in Yemen from 1996 to 2008. And we have had many seasons in the remote desert mountains of the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. The project meant that we camped together in the desert where there was no water, 7 hours from the nearest grocery store, for 2 months at a time. We got to know each other really well. We worked closely as a team with Yemenis, and we had French participants, some participants from the UK, and the occasional participant from Canada, well, a Canadian graduate student who matured through that project. So we were a multinational team. We had a large contingent of French colleagues involved. So we were a multinational team and very much enjoyed the experience of working together. So the book really is a culmination not only of the research and the considerable analysis we did on the things we found, but also on it's a compendium that includes some of our stories, some of the experience of being in the field together. I should probably back up also and just say that it's an archaeological report. It is a comprehensive scientific account of work that we did. A great deal of it was funded by the U.S. taxpayer through the National Science Foundation. And the project over many seasons developed a number of interesting sidelines, but throughout we were really focused on trying to understand how the domesticated plants and animals that were domesticated and became part of human food production systems elsewhere came to be adopted and integrated into Arabian ways of life. And when we set out on this project, that was something people didn't know and was intrinsically interesting because the southern part of Arabia lies at the epicenter of 3 different regions where people did domesticate plants and animals. And we wanted to know if you have a choice of materials from 3 different kind of packages of how to produce food, what do you choose? What drives that process? Something with broader implications for understanding how food production, which supports virtually every society on Earth today, spread around the globe.
So you're talking about domesticating plants and animals, and what about hunting and gathering? Is that combined with that, or?
Well, we know that Arabians, that there were people indigenous to Arabia from at least 30,000, maybe 50,000, possibly 80,000 years ago. So we know people have been there a long time. We know that in a period 20,000 years ago when the Earth had massive ice sheets and a lot of water was locked up in ice. We know Arabia was very dry, and people seem to have retreated to a few little refugia or enclaves. And after that, they repopulated Arabia out of those enclaves. And they did so by exploiting the plants and animals that were in Arabia. So they were hunting and gathering people. And at some point, which we now think is about 6,000, about the 8,000 years ago, 6,000 BCE, people began to adopt domesticated animals that had been domesticated elsewhere.
So what kind of animals did they domesticate?
Well, we didn't know until our research project was done, or at least, that was something we made a big contribution. And way down at the southern tip of Arabia in the dry mountains, we found a site that has the earliest domesticated cattle and the earliest domesticated sheep that come from Arabia.
Wow.
And it was I want to tell a little story here about the field work, because I think it's one of the great stories of being in a multinational, multidisciplinary team. So we'd been working together. We lived in the desert. We all pitched in to help each other's agendas, because there were several different things going on. And sometimes you needed all hands on deck to get one thing done. And so we were conducting an archaeological survey looking for archaeological sites, which the program that we had laid out that we wanted to do followed a very American style of doing things.
Okay.
In which we designated a parcel of land and kind of marked that out. And we would choose it kind of randomly, using a statistical approach to randomize our selection process. Mm-hmm. And then we'd walk, we'd plod across it in the heat, in the desert, everybody carrying little flags and looking on the surface for indications of sites. Well, the Yemeni scholars had been trained in a different tradition by their Russian colleagues in the time when South Yemen was a Russian, it was a communist state. Mm-hmm. And they thought that was a crazy idea, because they knew exactly which kind of places you should look. And our French colleagues felt the same way. They were like, you won't find anything here. Why don't we go over there where we know we'll find something? And we had a scientific, statistically designed reason for doing this that would allow us to make quantitative predictions about sites.
So it's kind of like intuitively it feels crazy like that. Why would...
Yeah. Intuitively, it felt crazy. But and so the story is,
it was valid.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was a scientific, quantitative approach. So, but under the sun, in the desert, it doesn't feel very smart. And so, the French and the Yemenis doggedly, patiently plodded along with us. They thought we were crazy. Mm-hmm. And then one day, my French colleague, Rémi Cassard, who has developed into an outstanding scholar at the forefront of French research, had an epiphany where he dropped to his knees, and you would have thought he was going to pray. He was just ecstatic, because the ground was carpeted with these hundreds and hundreds of beautifully knapped stone pieces that said to the trained eye, this is a major occupation of very, very early people who were right in that period of time when domestication was happening.
So you said knapped stones. What are knapped stones?
So when you take a piece of flint or chert and you strike it, the archaeologists call this knapping, when a stone tool maker uses a particular sequence of techniques to get an arrowhead or some pre-imagined, pre-designed tool that was that's characteristic.
So basically, like, you're striking rocks together and it flakes a piece of the rock off you're trying to shape.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. And it leaves a very characteristic signature. And stone is a really durable object. So some cultures in the world have left almost nothing behind except their stone tools. So it becomes a real calling card, if you like, for certain cultural affiliations.
So if you're ever wondering why there's such an emphasis on, arrowheads or like anything made of stone, really it's simply because it doesn't disintegrate. And so, it might seem like a minor part of the culture, but if you study those carefully, it can unlock certain, areas of understanding about, what life was like.
Exactly. And that's something that Remy went on to do. He wrote a dissertation at the Sorbonne, which was highly praised and won the top awards on those stone tools, and really defined for archaeologists of the future the patterns, the cultural patterns in how people made their tools. Which means that next time we go out and do a survey in the desert in Arabia and pick up a stone tool, we know kind of who it came from and what period it belongs to.
There you go. There you go. Like knowing basically kind of who was there, how long have people been there, and then who was there when.
So that's one of the important chapters in the book, is the discovery of that site, the explanation of the work we did there, the analysis of the stone tools, the analysis of the animal bones that allowed us to find and date the very earliest cattle and sheep, and to associate those with a culture of foraging, hunting, and gathering people who first picked up those animals and used them. But I'd like to talk about another chapter in that book, if I may.
Yeah.
So one of the questions that people ask me as an archaeologist is, have you ever found anything really interesting? And they kind of expect, well, some people expect, Tutankhamun's tomb. And no, I haven't found any gold treasure. I did once find a little strip of gold that had been on the bottom of a Roman imperial standard, but that's another story. What I think is the most exciting discovery to date was a ring of 40 or more cattle skulls that had been stripped of their flesh, many of them. The mandibles had been taken off. The tongues had been cut out. They had been shoved into the mud of a stream bank.
How did you know the tongues had been cut out?
Well, that's the work of Louise Martin, a British zooarchaeologist who studied these cattle skulls after we got them out of the ground. But when we found them by the same kind of method I just described, this plodding survey in places that nothing should be. And we discovered these bones crumbling out of the side of a little gully. So we started to excavate, and lo and behold, here were these cattle skulls, which were, the excavation was incredible. We had to pour water on the this concrete, hard, silty ground, and then slowly chip away from the bone, just like you were a dentist picking things off of teeth. I mean, it was just really, and they came out with all the teeth. And people worked really hard in the field on this. Our Yemeni colleagues developed tendonitis and ended up like wrapping their elbows and their arms. They refused to stop working and take a break. And then we had this big flood, and we were cut off from the site, and all of the bone was exposed, and it was a very fragile state. And one of the Bedouin who was working for us, on his own, we were cut off. We couldn't talk to them because we were on the other side of this flooded valley. And this man walked up to the site from his from the cave where he was staying with his family and his flocks. And he slept beside those exposed skulls to keep anybody else who was curious from coming along and messing with them until the floodwaters receded. So we got these skulls out of the ground, but they have an incredible story, because what we realized was that this was the site of a large gathering where there was a sacrifice of 40 cattle at a time. And if you think about it, that's a heck of a lot of meat.
That's a lot of meat.
If you do the back of the envelope calculation, and we did a little bit more than that.
It's a big party.
It's a big party. It was a huge feast. And
how many people would that feed? I mean, that's a lot.
Well, if you had one meal, it would feed 5,000 people.
Wow.
So the question is, how many people did it feed? Because we're in a desert, and it was a little bit wetter, but it was by no means the Garden of Eden when we were when people were living there and had
cattle would be there. Like it doesn't like. I was surprised to learn that there were cattle there. Actually,
there was the climate was wetter until about 6,000 years ago. So this site was about 6,500 years old. So we were surprised to find cattle there. And there was a little bit of a hilarious story about thinking they were camels, and they weren't camels, and we figured out they were cattle skulls.
Yeah.
But we once we had dug them out and done the analysis and realized that they had all been killed at once and butchered at once, and this ring of skulls had been set up kind of to commemorate this huge gathering, a sacrifice, and a feast, we realized that the landscape back then couldn't support 5,000 people. It couldn't support 1,500 people. It could permanently support probably a maximum of about 60 people. And so that led the British analysts to look at the teeth of these cattle. And what they learned from that was that the animals had grown up in 3, maybe 4 different places. So they belonged to at least 4 herds, maybe more. But the last 2 weeks of their life, they'd been eating the same food in the same place.
Fattening them up.
Right. So what we began to see was a gathering of people from far away, bringing their animals, coming together, having a big feast, and then setting up a kind of a memorial to it.
Right.
This was a pretty big discovery for ancient Arabia. And I'd like you to imagine with me and jump forward about, let's see, 5,000 years from that 6,500-year-old feast.
Okay.
And if you jump forward 6,000, that period of time, you come to the pre-Islamic era, when we know from literary sources that sacrifice, gathering, and a large commemorative feast was the major way in which people formed a social bond above and beyond sort of like their home and their village. That it was really the major practice in Arabia before the Islamic period, in which people belonged to a bigger community.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
they had done this thing. They had gone to the gathering, participated in the feast, and
it probably allows different groups to intermarry as well, right? I mean, wouldn't that be a part of the?
Oh, I'm sure this was really important. If you think about being a small herding family wandering around in the desert, maybe not wandering, but following a seasonal round, and you're trying to find enough food for your cattle or your sheep and goats, and you can't really hang out with 5,000 people and all the animals they have.
Right.
But say you're 5 to 7 people in your family with maybe 60 animals, 60 to 80 animals, and you're moving around trying to get them food. You need a way to find a wife for your son or a husband for your daughter. You need to find out where there's been rain this year and the grazing's going to be good. You need to find a way to get a few pieces of obsidian to make the very sharpest stone tools that you like, but the obsidian isn't local. You need to find out if there are areas where there are disturbances or raids, or if there are hostilities towards people you're connected to somewhere. So information and exchange of information, marriage partners, uh, exotic stones and shells have
Mhm.
to move along networks that are formed through people being connected to each other. But they have to have a way to be connected and to affirm the sense of belonging to a social order.
Yes, absolutely. And so these gatherings, would they be like once a year, follow a certain seasonal pattern? Do you know, or can you tell from the record? Or?
We think they probably were annual. Um, and that's because we did a lot of study of the environment and the information that's available of what the environment used to be like. And so this valley where we did most of our work, called Wadi Sana, it used to flood every year. Um,
Mm,
we were there for a very rare flooding event, but the floods, when there was more rain 6,500 years ago, the floods
mm,
were annual. And it would have been very dangerous to be in those narrow, deep canyons with all your animals. So people would only have gone there in the dry season, or right at the end of the flood season when there was this lush growth of grass that the animals could benefit from.
So basically, this wadi is like an empty riverbed that when it fills up, it's like rushing massive, like white water or something like that.
Yeah, for people in the United States who are listening, this is an environment that's quite like some of the arroyos of the Southwest, where flash flooding can be quite dangerous and the canyon sides can be very steep. Um, the the great Wadi Hadramaut, which splits right through the southern part of Yemen, is like the Grand Canyon with these
Mm,
high plateaus and then a whole different life going on way down, a mile down in the valley.
wow. Incredible, incredible landscapes. And that's actually, we didn't mention the title, I don't think, of your book. It's Landscape History of Hadramaut, correct? So,
That's
yeah.
right. That's right. And that was really because I and the team see humans as part of and forming landscape. It's really hard to talk about life in Arabia in the past without thinking about people adapting to and shaping the landscapes they're in. And even though we don't think of people shaping and changing a place like a desert, we do, and we have, and we could find the traces of that. We saw that people practice technologies of channeling and managing water flow so that
Mm,
they could enhance the growth of certain parts of the landscape and put more water on it so that they would get better grass. We saw that they burned vegetation where it was dense to suppress the trees and really enhance the amount of grass that the cattle would have.
mm. Shaping the landscape.
Shaping the landscape, forming a little niche that was better suited to support humans and their domesticated animals. And people started doing that just as soon as they had domesticated animals.
Wow. So
So
that's probably a pattern you find elsewhere in the world.
it is. And the experience of working in this area and my pleasure at working with teams um, led to a textbook that I wrote with my colleague, Dr. Julie Field, here at The Ohio State University, where we were interested in that process of, the technical term for it is human behavioral ecology. And we were interested in how that process played out in a huge narrative that is our global landscape. And we wrote a textbook called World Prehistory and the Anthropocene, in which we did just that. We looked at the long-term process of humans shaping our Earth and shaping our planet, and make the argument that what we see today in climate change is the outcome and the continuation of a process that we can trace back as far as we can see humans.
Makes it sound even more difficult to solve that problem.
Well, that would be a pessimistic way to look at it. Can I offer an optimistic one?
Oh, please do. Yes.
So what we, as archaeologists, and this is not an observation unique to me and Dr. Field, but it's in fact something that archaeologists can bring to as a really important, relevant lesson for our times. When we look at how people have shaped the earth and shaped the environment, whether you're talking about Polynesians who voyaged in voyaging canoes and settled the Pacific islands across a vast expanse, or whether you're talking about Sumerians who used alcohol to purify water so they could live in deserts and in densely packed cities where sanitation would have been a problem if you didn't use a little bit of alcohol to drink your water. So whatever part of shaping the world to benefit human population and survival you look at, technology is at the core. And technology has been there all the way back to the first stone tools that helped humans to strip.
Those are a form of technology. Like, we think of technology in terms of devices and cell phones and things, but an anthropological perspective is that technology is, I don't know, maybe you can explain something, a slightly different perspective.
Technology is the cultural practices that allow humans to interface with the environment in a way no other animal can do. And so, technology is part of human culture, and it's part of being human all the way back to the very first stone tools. Mm-hmm. And those first stone tools, way back to, say, the older one, even pre-human use of stone, allowed humans to access and scavenge carcasses of animals and become meat eaters, which had tremendous impacts on our biology and ultimately our reproductive success and our ability to spread across the face of the planet.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's not my specialty, but it's a well-known part of anthropology.
I always wondered, about the insect eating that maybe our ancestors did, that now is not culturally appropriate, but like the ways we've found protein. I guess probably nutritionally, a protein isn't necessarily always just a protein, but anyway, I'm digressing. It's just fascinating. So technology is a big part of this story. And so where were we about technology? Oh yeah, you're talking about how that affects climate change. And so if you think about it as just a part of our DNA, like that's how we function, like or if you think of our culture as an extension of ourselves, that I guess if we become more conscious of that, we can change the way we can impact ourselves collectively, and not just like sort of more selfishly or more kind of with short-sighted ways of looking at, what we're trying to impact.
I think in looking at our Anthropocene, and so I'm still talking about this textbook that we've written, World Prehistory and the Anthropocene, we can see that technology has been the interface with humans and environmental challenges. And it always has been our interface. It is the it is the cause, or it is the tool that we have used to spread and occupy all the places in the globe. I mean, there's even a station in in the South Pole. And it's technology that has allowed us to do this. Yeah. So I think it would be overly pessimistic to think that we've come to the end of that relationship, that, we don't have enough human ingenuity and we won't be able to use technologies and invent technologies that will allow us to interface with the environments of the future. It may well be that the environments of the future are going to be different from what we have today. And I'm not a climate scientist, so I don't have anything of any expertise to draw on there. But climate change is real, and science tells us that. And we at Ohio State have gone a long way to contributing to that understanding of climate change with the work of the Bird Center. And so we understand that environments are going to continue to change just as they have in the past. But we have not been stripped of our cultural DNA, as you put it. We have not been stripped of our ability to design new technologies and adapt new ways of social interaction to the kinds of environments we find ourselves in. So I'm hopeful about our future, even though I recognize that I can't predict it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's absolutely within our grasp to change I mean, we're good at adapting, right? Like, doesn't that story also have that ending to it, or that takeaway?
Oh, it does. And this touches on something that's been very personal to me. There are, it's understandable for people to say, why do we spend money going to the moon? Why do we spend money searching for what life was like in the Arabian desert 6,500 years ago? How does that have anything to do with our crises and problems today? Wouldn't it be better to spend taxpayer money on poverty, on education? And I hear those arguments. I feel that the archaeology I do and my colleagues do has been extremely instrumental into bringing us to recognize what is our human nature. If we don't look into the past to understand these relationships through building up case study after case study of how humans interact with their environments, then we can't understand the fundamental relationships and abstract processes that are at the core of our existence on the planet. So I would argue that archaeology has made and continues to make this incredible contribution to our understanding of what it takes to face our challenges today.
Mm-hmm. That's the quote of the day.
And that was how Dr. Field and I got into writing this textbook. If I sort of tell you the story of how that came about, it was in part because we felt like the way we were teaching our introductory archaeology class was not capturing the attention of students, because it didn't feel quite relevant enough to the changing concerns of education as job skills training. And we wanted to
that's a very big challenge for academia today, just for our audience. Like, universities are, especially in terms of how we relate to the government and, our use of taxpayer funds and all those things. Like, a lot of times the government uses the term workforce, like you brought that word up, and it's because, not only the government, but people want to see that their education has a tangible benefit, and that, people are going to be ready to succeed in their lives, as a result of it. And, that though can take away from, if we're just teaching skills at the university, it takes away from the idea that we're actually developing in a long-term perspective human knowledge about ourselves, about the world, about the universe, all those things. And it's just like the age-old debate of what's more important. And so I just wanted to really emphasize what a big challenge you're taking up, that a lot of professors not only won't take up, but are really like adamant about it. Like, no, we're not workforce training. Like, we don't even consider that. So yeah, so you took on a challenge there.
I feel like we have, like in my career, I've been able to contribute not only to understanding what life was like in Arabia during the Neolithic period, but to make major contributions to the challenges of our time. In a few years ago, the challenges of our time were the aftermath of 9/11 and the Arab Spring in the Middle East, the intersection of American security interests with contemporary Middle Eastern societies and aspirations. I'm not a political scientist, so I'm not going to delve deep into that, but I should say that I was traveling and a guest in the Middle East through all of that. I've spent 40 years as a guest in majority Muslim communities across the Middle East, in places that bring shivers to many people's, many Americans today. Syria, Jordan, not so much. Egypt, Yemen, and most recently the southern part of and northern part of Oman. I've traveled briefly in Saudi Arabia and several other Middle Eastern countries. So I came to the post 9/11 with a sense of responsibility to, on the one hand, serve as I and my team serving as what I called science ambassadors in the Middle East, the opportunity for Middle Easterners to meet their first Americans in an atmosphere, a political atmosphere that was supercharged. I also felt a sense of responsibility in the classroom for American students to meet someone who understands some things about the Middle East that are not widely recognized, and to be a teacher not only for the students who wanted to learn about the archaeology of Arabia 6,500 years ago, but for the students who wanted some exposure to the Middle East, who were studying Arabic and wanted to know a little bit more about culture. To students, I had a number of veterans of the Iraq and Afghanistan American forces abroad in my classroom who came back from one experience of the Middle East and wanted to broaden what they knew while they were going through college on the GI Bill. And I've always felt like I needed to be a teacher and a facilitator and provide courses that are relevant to those students as well. So my personal experiences in the Middle East have formed a part of my teaching, a part of my writing, and a part of my mission in this charged atmosphere.
Yeah. Like it goes deeper than just a job. It's very very much a calling.
It does. Do we have time for me to tell you a little story? All of you out there?
Well, we do. Yeah, go ahead. Yep.
So one of the ways that I came to think about this was observing the questions that people ask me. I have spoken to a very diverse set of audiences, ranging from petroleum workers in oil fields in the Middle East, university students in Sana'a, Yemen, the department or the Ministry of Heritage and Culture in Oman, students in the classrooms and in kind of public venues like this one here. And I've noticed that there's a difference in the way audiences frame their questions. When I teach in the United States, or I'm speaking to a largely Western audience, the question that comes up first is usually something like, what's it like to work as a woman over there?
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that my countrymen here in the United States have on occasion found it really hard to believe that a woman leads a team of archaeologists in the remote wildlands of Yemen, where all the women, or most of them, are covered in black from head to toe with only their eyes showing. I mean, what's it like? How can you do that? Go out there as a woman and lead a team. And my answer to that is that people in the Middle East, as far as I can tell, rarely see me as a woman first. I mentioned that I play a role as an American science ambassador. So the fact that I'm American and foreign, and often the first one of each of those categories that anyone has met. Think of these Bedouin tending their sheep in Wadi Sana, who never go to school, who have very little commercial interaction with the outside world. So I'm an American, I'm a foreigner, I'm a Christian, and the first, right. that's a hard one to get over, an infidel who doesn't
I can relate to that. Yeah, from when I lived in Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
So by the time they get to me being a woman, it's kind of, if they notice at all, it's kind of inconsequential, because I've already got so much going on that's strange, that I'm a Westerner. And so it
also could be that their gender roles aren't necessarily what Americans perceive them to be, even though it's because they're dressed all in black. It seems like they're really rigid about it, but maybe they're not as rigid as we think.
Well, I guess my point is that my gender is not the first thing that people see about me. And it's not although that's an American assumption about the Middle East and what is the most important socially qualifying characteristic. I'm rich compared to many of the people I meet. So I have this fabulous access to resources that are unimaginable. And so that quality of being, of my gender is important to Americans, but not so much, at least not at first importance in the Middle East. The other part of this story is, do you want to know the question that people in the Middle East ask me?
I do.
Because it's fairly consistent. If I'm talking to an audience of people who are Muslim and are in kind of a traditional setting, or are among compatriots, the first question is, and who are not archaeologists, not used to archaeologists.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
The first question is, yes, but what does Quran say about your research? And the first time I heard this question, I was flustered. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm not a Muslim. I have no right to say anything about Quran. I don't know. It doesn't have anything to do with my research. Why are they asking this?
Yeah.
And I blubbered something about, please ask my Yemeni colleague who's here with me. I'm not qualified to answer that. And then the question came again and again. And I started to ask myself, why is this question being asked?
Yeah.
Not how do I answer it, But what is
Right.
really the question? What is the question?
Mhm.
And I began to, and this was something I spoke about with Dr. Payen at some length many years ago. I began to consider the epistemologies of knowledge, or the way, what are sanctioned, important ways of coming to knowledge. We in the West, and I as a social scientist, place a high value on science as a way of coming to knowledge, using the scientific method, our 5 senses of observation to gather data, whether that's to test a hypothesis or to gather a series of case studies that helps us formulate an idea, a broad or theoretical observation. And that's something that's very much embedded in our education system, in our way of thinking. Of course, we have other epistemologies. We have a historic epistemology that is based on theories of how history works. We have a religious epistemology. Creationists would argue that that revelation, divine revelation, is the way we know about how the earth was formed. And so we're used to those different epistemologies in the West. As I started to dig into this, I realized that question, what does Quran say about your research, is really a question about epistemology. Where we in the West are used to a scientist getting up, expecting that the talk is going to be about science, structuring it to speak to knowing about that way, presenting some data, explaining what it means, interpreting that data.
Lately, that when people say data, they mean science. Like
they mean science.
Yeah, like it started. Well, where's the data? Do you have data on that? And I'm thinking, you mean raw data? No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's invoking an epistemology.
Yes.
It immediately ties the conversation and the expectation that valuable knowledge comes out of this way of knowing. I want to say again, it's not the only way of knowing that we use in the West. There's a way of knowing called discourse, and I'm not going to go there, but I'm just mentioning that there are other ones.
Yeah.
In that question, what does Quran say about your research? I came to realize it's actually a challenge to epistemology. It's actually saying to me, you're starting from a place that I don't think I'm not used to you starting, or I don't think you should be starting. In an Islamic society, the highest, and this is very structured, the highest epistemology is revelation. The highest way of knowing about the world comes from the revelation in Quran, which was revealed and explains things.
Explains how we came to be. It's an anthropology, right? I mean, in some ways, like that's what it is.
I would hesitate to interpret Quran as being anything other than a revelation, which is what Muslims who know it better than I agree. So it is an epistemology. It's a way of knowing the world. And as I came to understand, if I'm correct in this, in Islamic faith, scientific epistemology is recognized, but it is a lesser form of knowledge. And that goes right back to the beginnings of Islam.
So just to back up here, so if you're like talking to local civilians who aren't archaeologists and they're, kind of wondering what it's all about, like, why are you here? What are you doing? Kind of thing. They're thinking about it in terms, yes, they recognize that it's rooted in science and that's a valid way of, thinking about research, but then they also need to kind of grapple with the idea that, the Quran also mentions life before Islam, obviously, because it came before there was Islam. It started to be revealed before there was, I guess, a codified religion based around the Quran, you know? So they're kind of grappling with two strands or more, maybe. There's probably local traditions and histories as well.
That's true. And I wouldn't want this anecdote in any way to suggest that the the popular audiences who ask this question of me in the Middle East are somehow less knowledgeable than popular audiences in the United States. Mm-hmm. I've given talks at churches where people ask about, the Bible and creation. Absolutely. So we have those multiple epistemologies that are strong about the past in our own society as well.
That is so true. I think it's in our language, so we don't even think about it because, you're just speaking, you're just communicating, but yeah, so many ideas come from the Bible in our society here, like in Columbus, for example. We don't really think about it. So many come from Shakespeare or from, there's a whole canon there. That's so interesting. So since we are needing to wrap up pretty soon, can you tell us about your future projects or maybe just what you're working on now that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. So I've talked about how it's been important for my anthropological skills and research to be relevant to the challenges of our time. And this is a project, you know what my next project is, Melinda, because you're part of that team. I realized in conversation with other team members this summer that my skills and experience as a team builder, a team leader, a grant writer, were skills that I should draw on to be an ally in the social justice and Black Lives Matter movement. And that while I would like to march in the streets and have marched in the streets, these are skills that I could be sharing with an important social concern of our time. So with you, Melinda, and colleagues here at Ohio State and outside of Ohio State, we've written a proposal to build a model for how we might address implicit bias and prejudice here at the Ohio State University. And to this, I bring not any particular academic qualifications as a scholar of racism in this country, but the habits of scholarship and the skill set to pull in people who do have those qualifications and that deep knowledge, and also have skills like yours that will help carry this idea into a working team and a working project. And so we're pretty excited about what that's going to look like.
Yes, yeah, I'm pretty excited. I think it's going to really engage student perspectives and faculty perspectives in a new way. And I like how we're really focused on action too, which sets it apart from the typical grant project at a university, which is more focused on writing a text as the action, where we're starting with action. We're, going to be setting up activities to, immediately start benefiting students at not only our university, but at historically Black colleges and universities. And so we're just starting with that from the get-go, and then developing our understanding, as we reflect on how things are going and how we can improve, and most importantly, how the institutions can change, and how they should change.
And it may seem like a long way away from the Neolithic in Southern Arabia, but it draws not only on my skills, but things that we know from the Middle Eastern Studies Center, which is part of an Office of International Affairs, where we're really good at understanding culture and cultural difference, and in sending people abroad to experience a broader world than the one that their own prejudices and biases have shaped for them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really think, also what we're looking at is the problem of silos at universities, where you have a lot of not only professors, but other types of professionals working on the front lines with, issues like cultural differences. And they kind of stay in their lane because they're so busy, and because there's not as much emphasis on, reflection and evaluation. There's kind of, speaking of American culture, that's kind of like, be productive, keep going. You have to like stop and reflect sometimes and see how, we're doing overlaps with what another office is doing, or maybe their perspective on what we're doing could really help us think more critically about it. And so that's also, I think, a unique or, a very needed aspect of the project. So very exciting. So I'll put when I post this podcast, I'll put links to our project as well. And I'd also like to make sure to put, other things, because we might have some Ohio State students here in the audience. They may want to take a course with you. Like what courses do you offer at Ohio State?
I have taught, with the support of the Middle Eastern Studies Center for years. I have been teaching Middle Eastern Studies courses. So I teach a course of the Archaeology of the Ancient Near East that focuses on ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia. I teach a course on the Archaeology of the Holy Land that is a course that shows what we know archaeologically about the Eastern Mediterranean and the area that's modern Israel as a multicultural, multi-ethnic community through all the time that we can see archaeologically, and shows how the great religions emerged from that, or some of the great religions emerged from that polyglot, polyethnic community. I also teach a course called Contemporary Perspectives on the Ancient Near East, which has discourse as an epistemology and is focused on how the way we understand ourselves has shaped the way we think about what the ancient Near East was like and what it means as part of our own histories. So those are some of the Near Eastern courses I teach.
Wow, I want to take all three.
And I also teach the Introduction to Archaeology course, which uses this World Prehistory textbook that I.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that's a good entry-level general education course for students at OSU.
Yes. So we've covered your what was it called? World Prehistory and the Anthropocene is your textbook recently, and then there's also Landscape History of Hadramaut. And you said are you working on a book now? Did I get that right?
I am. The Ministry of Heritage and Culture in Oman intends to publish a book called Persistent Pastoralism in its Archaeology of Oman series. And it is a book that will report on the research that my team has been doing since 2009 in the southern part of Oman.
Okay, well, I'm going to open it up to comments. I don't see any so far. And again, I'm still learning these tools, so forgive me if I missed any questions that you might have had in the audience. But please go ahead and post on Facebook in the live stream. And I'm sorry, I can't share my screen because I'm using Chrome today, and I normally don't use it. And Ohio State has very strict security standards, so I'm not able to change the settings on Chrome so that I can share the book cover. But I'll definitely link to the book again in the podcast post, and I'll go ahead also and just post that here to everyone if they want to follow up. Just the link to go to our podcast site. Loading. Oh, yes, there it is. Okay. So hopefully that came to everybody, and I want to thank everyone for sticking around for the whole hour, and thank you again, Professor McCorriston, for taking time out, because I know that just all the work you're doing, it takes a lot to carve out some time to spend with us, and I will do my best to make this valuable and keep growing our audience and growing hits on this podcast so people can learn about you. And I'm really excited about this podcast, just in terms of getting a chance to have this conversation, really learn. I mean, I've learned about your work over the years, but it's just really nice to have a nice long conversation about it and really get to know it better. So it's not just words on a page in a grant proposal and stuff like that. It's like real life. And I do want to really recommend Landscape History of Hadramaut. It is written in a very engaging way, and it's organized in such a way where like I did, you can read the introduction and conclusion, and it's, gives you these great stories about field work. I want to spark people's interest in research through field work, because it is, like for me, like I feel more excited about learning through actual physical action. And I think there are a lot of students out there like me who've always enjoyed learning that way and really interacting with people, and and then also all the challenges that you encounter. It's not easy, and it's definitely not always glamorous to travel. There's a whole spectrum of travel, from tourism to deep field work, when you have to follow like where the math tells you to go, for example, and it's just this kind of scary open field.
Oh my gosh, I remember the time that we were camping. It was kind of early in the season. I thought we were going to cook for ourselves. And after 2 days of that, I was like, oh my gosh, there's no way we can do this. I was, about to fall asleep on my feet from getting up at 4 a.m. just to get the tea water boiled for everybody for breakfast. And so I said, we need a cook. And our dear Yemeni colleague, Abdul Basit, I thought, it'll take weeks to get a cook. They'll have to advertise. And I'm just thinking very American. He drove to Sayoun, 7 hours away, went into the hotel kitchen, offered the cook more money than he was making right then in the hotel kitchen. The cook quit. He said, can we go by my house and pick up my clothes? He came with, this tiny little bundle over his shoulder, and he stayed with us and cooked for the rest of the season. And it was the best food ever.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the food is so important.
The challenges of field work.
Yeah. No,
when they say an army marches on its stomach, it's really true.
Oh, it's so important. And then it also is socially important, brings everyone together. So, yeah. And you've taken many OSU students out in the field with you as well.
I usually take an undergraduate every season, and then of course there are graduate students who have participated as and are core members of the team who have come back year after year. But I'm very pleased to be able to take one undergraduate, usually just one.
There you go. See, so those of you who stayed to the end and you're feeling inspired, who knows, maybe you'll have a chance to go out and do this kind of exciting field work one day. And now you know the kind of questions to ask your professors, and maybe you can even take a class with Dr. McCorriston. So So exciting. Thank you so much.
Well,
Any
thank you for
questions?
this chance to talk with you and all of your listeners. And I am always pleased to have a venue where I can just talk about the work we do and why it really is important to support archaeology and to support, basic science.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. I mean, there's nothing like a conversation like this to make that connection between our, our lives, our daily lives, and basic science and basic research, and how universities really are part of fabric of our lives. So thank you so much. And I think I'm going to go ahead and sign off unless there's anything else we need. Are there any other resources you want to share with students having to do with Middle East archaeology or anything?
Well, I have, there's I'll send to you the web page site where there's updates on the news of our ongoing project in Oman. That's a kind of a blog post, it's a series of blog posts which introduces the rest of the team. And I want to emphasize that this is really teamwork. This isn't my research, it's our research, and it doesn't happen without all those faces and all those shoulders to the wheel. So I'll send you that, and hope to see people in class.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you so much. I'd love to do a follow-up interview one day just about teamwork. So ideas for the future too. And I look forward to our next team meeting for our project to create a model for a OSU HBCU Federation. And I need to put off a report that was due yesterday so I could prepare for this interview. So I'm going to work on that, and definitely will be promoting our project in that as well. So lots to do. All right. Well, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and end the broadcast now. Thanks everyone who attended, and for all of you listeners later on to the recording. Have a great day.
Have a great day. Goodbye. Thank you, Melinda.
Bye-bye.